Welcome to our presentation for RH330. Today, we're talking about nuclear fusion, its history, its future, its benefits, and especially why we think that negative popular opinion is one of the biggest obstacles facing the creation of effective nuclear fusion. But first, a little bit about ourselves.
Before continuing with our proposal presentation, we would like to quickly introduce the team. There is myself, Joshua Erpenbeck, Joseph Lehman, Clayton Shire, and Clea Hodes, and we are the Advanced Fusion Professionals.
Our team believes nuclear fusion can be used as an energy source. Now, the reason we believe that is we did some research regarding global energy consumption. And as provided by the graphic, we found that 84% of the world's energy consumption is provided by non-renewable energy sources, such as oil, natural gas, and coal. Now, the Met Group, which published the article along with this graphic, went on to explain that oil and natural gas will be depleted in less than 55 years, around 50 to 55 years. Now, this creates urgency around the world from general public, world leaders, in finding a new energy source that can provide energy for years to come. Our team believes that nuclear fusion is that option, and it is the right option to make. Now, this is not to be confused with nuclear fission, which is sort of similar, but there are some big differences where nuclear fusion is proven to be the better option than nuclear fission, and we're going to explain that throughout the PowerPoint presentation today. But first, a good background on nuclear fusion is...
The first steps in the development of nuclear fission occurred in the late 1800s. This included the discovery of the element uranium and deepening the understanding of the atom. In the early 1900s, scientists started experimenting and began to notice that nuclear transformations would occur whenever a neutron would collide with the uranium atom. These nuclear transformations had huge potential of heavily impacting World War II in the form of nuclear weapons. The United States government made this a top priority and founded the Manhattan Project with the goal of creating a nuclear weapon. In the span of 3 years of nuclear weapon development, the United States' best scientists had successfully created a working atomic bomb. Once World War II is over, the mindset for the use of nuclear energy changed. The new potential was not in the form of weapons anymore, but in the form of commercial energy. This transition is what started the first generation of nuclear energy. This newly created generation resulted in multiple power plants being built all over the world. And even though these newly created plants are doing a wonderful job providing practical energy to society, they unfortunately went through multiple disasters. And such disasters included the 3 Mile Island reactor and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And even though these reactors were doing a great job and being very beneficial to society, people only remember these first-generation reactors for their disasters. As a result of the past disasters of the early generations, the nuclear energy industry began enforcing increased safety and regulations to power plants. In addition to the increased safety, new types of power plants were being designed. This included variations of power plants that used light water, heavy water, and economic simplified boiling reactors. With the combination of advanced safety regulations and improved power plant designs, the disasters began to disappear. This resulted in nuclear fission emerging as the obvious candidate for the best commercial energy source. However, nuclear fusion is a different story. If society were able to harness nuclear fusion, there would never be another energy crisis ever.
So what is nuclear fusion? Nuclear fusion is essentially two small light nuclei combining to create one larger one, and in the process creating an abundance of energy. Nuclear fission, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite of nuclear fusion. It is the splitting of a large atom into two smaller ones. And in this process, it also creates a large amount of energy. Due to their differences, there's different safety concerns that come with each.
Now that nuclear fusion and nuclear fission have been differentiated, and you now know some key differences between the processes of creating energy with those two, I can get into the actual safety differences of nuclear fusion versus fission and why nuclear fusion is the better option in terms of safety. Now, there's two pretty main differences between nuclear fusion and nuclear fission safety-wise. The first being the chances of nuclear runaway. Now, with nuclear runaway in fission, it can be an outside source affects something with the process, and the nuclear process runs away, gets way too hot, and there's an explosion, and it's really bad. That's short term. Nuclear fusion doesn't have the chance of that happening. The process is such a precise and delicate process that any outside source affecting it will just shut it off. The plasma involved in the process will cool off immediately. And this was being described by ITER, who is the International Nuclear Fusion Research and Engineering Project, which is backed by 35 different nations. Now, that was short term, more like catastrophic. What if that happened? Now, long term is the actual byproducts of this process. Now, fission does have some toxic byproducts that come with the process, and that's a big negative with it. You can't really, it's hard to get rid of those. Now, nuclear fusion does not have those same byproducts. The process does not produce toxic gases, no toxic waste. So in these two aspects, long-term and short-term, nuclear fusion is definitely the better option compared to fission. Now that I have described the safety parts of nuclear fusion, we can get more into the actual possibility of using nuclear fusion So fusion is actually possible. It's already been done. ITER has made the tokamak reactor, which has created energy off nuclear fusion, but they're working on right now getting it to create a net positive energy gain instead of just creating energy. Right now, it takes more energy to run it than to the actual output of energy. But that is what they're working on right now. They say they're getting close. They say they're 10 years out, but there's that saying, you're always 10 years away from the nuclear fusion reactor. But they say they're confident that they are very close to getting a discovery where they will have a net gain, a positive net gain. And we believe that they will be doing that, especially with the backing of the 35 different nations. The current problems that also were kind of a safety thing is the particular environment has to be in, where everything has to be precise. That can be a problem too. If the reaction stops just because a fly goes in it, then that's a problem. But we believe with the new technology that ITER is implementing, fusion is definitely possible and will be possible in the future.
One of the great advantages of nuclear power is the energy density associated with it. Now, in a 2015 study concerning the comparison of different power generation techniques from the University of Bath in the United Kingdom, the primary advantage of this energy density was highlighted quite starkly. Now, as you can see, the energy density per square kilometer used for nuclear energy absolutely dwarfs all of solar, wind, and biomass. This makes nuclear a very promising option, especially for areas where land is a premium. But this isn't the only aspect of fusion that's particularly beneficial. Now, because fusion is a completely controllable reaction, it wouldn't be dependent on a region's natural resources. For example, fusion reactors could operate regardless of daylight levels, or whether there's wind. This also means that fusion reactors have a more constant output as opposed to being dependent upon peak sun or peak wind like some other renewables. This even allows them to alter production in order to meet demand, also unlike other renewables.
One advantage of nuclear fusion is the byproducts. Nuclear fusion creates an abundance of energy with no long-lived nuclear waste. Helium is the main product, and having more helium is more of a positive than anything. The main issue of nuclear waste is tied to nuclear fission, not nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission reactions use uranium-235, which is a radioactive material with a half-life of 700 million years. The most nuclear fusion has is tritium, which only has a half-life of 12.3 years. Yes, nuclear waste is an issue, but it's not an issue for nuclear fusion. On top of that, nuclear fusion and nuclear energy in general create no greenhouse gases, which makes it way more sustainable than most of our sources of energy.
To convince the public that nuclear fusion is the best option for energy going forward, we had to think of a way to get a hold of the largest amount of the public we can. And based on research by the Pew Research Center and also Edison Research, we found that 7 out of 10 people that were surveyed in this Pew Research survey said they use at least one form of social media, as you can see by the graphic. Now, we also wanted to go further and say, well, just using social media, people scroll by a bunch of stuff all the time. So we wanted to do podcasts. And Edison Research did a research paper on what podcast was the best going into quarter 2 of this year, 2021. and they found that the Joe Rogan Experience was the #1 podcast for all podcasts on streaming sites. So we had the idea to send a letter to Joe Rogan asking him to talk about our nuclear fusion and the research that we did, and even do his own research, look into it, see what was better and what was not as good about nuclear fusion, just to get people talking about it, because that's the best way that we found that we can get the public's opinion of nuclear fusion to change for the better.
One of humanity's most startlingly brilliant achievements was traveling to the moon and back. Now, a staggering feat by any measure, this was only made possible by the determination of people and public support. Now, we see parallels between this journey to the moon and the development of nuclear fusion. Without public support, it simply will not happen. But if people decide this is a worthy endeavor, the many complications needing nuclear fusion can be overcome. And so, we ask you, become an advocate. At the heart of our issue is the fact that the campaign against nuclear fission has shifted over to nuclear fusion, and we don't think this is valid. You can change that. The only way to shift popular opinion is by the efforts of many, many people. With the advent of social media, it's now easier than ever. Talk to someone, tell the world, advocate for support of nuclear fusion. And a special thank you to all of our sources.